So let's start with a tour of the interface. Your monitor, your playback controls, and the overlay options, gallery, and your snapshots. And this is where you get your nods. Nods have two different spaces. These are the nods for your current clip, and if you go to the drop-down menu here and choose track, these are the nods for your entire track, so every nod here will affect your entire timeline. Let's get this back to clip. This is your timeline where every single clip of your timeline is displayed as an image, and they all have the same thumbnail size regardless of the length of this particular clip in the timeline. So this is actually a visual representation of this timeline here. If you go back to edit, so every clip on this timeline is represented in this timeline as a thumbnail that is the same size regardless of the original length of this clip in the timeline. You can scroll right all the way to the end of the timeline, and here you have the coloring effects in these two windows. First is the camera raw, where you can actually change the raw settings for your camera if you shot raw. Then you have the primaries. These are your primary controls. We're going to get in depth with the primaries later. And if you go to this drop-down menu, you find your log controls. We're going to also get into this later. You can also switch between primaries and log through these two dots here. And here you have also the same primaries, just displayed in a different way. So these controls here are basically the same controls that you find under primaries. So whatever I change here will be reflected here and vice versa. Then you have the RGB mixer, and then the motion effects. The motion effects are one of the effects that does not work unless you have the full version of Resolve. And this is where you get your curves control. You have 6 types of curves in Resolve. You can also access these curves through the drop-down menu. Then you have your qualifier. This is where you do your qualification. We're going to get into this later. You have 3 types of qualifications here, the HSL, RGB, and Luma. You can also access them through the drop-down menu here. Then we have our power windows. Here you can choose what type of power window you want. Then motion tracking. This is motion tracking. This is where you actually track one of your windows to something on the screen. And then the blur effects, which are blur, sharpen, and mist. Then you have your key, your sizing, then 3D. We don't have a 3D file now, and it doesn't work on the light version of Resolve. And this is the keyframe window. This is where you change your effects over time. We're going to get into that later. There are 2 more windows here that are hidden. First, we have our scopes. If we come to the monitor, right-click and show scopes. This is where we have our scopes. We have the waveform, parade, vector scope, and histogram. And we have the Lightbox View. If we come here and click on this is called the Lightbox View, where we can actually see all of our clips side by side in order to determine if the flow of color was right from the beginning of the film to the end. We can change the size of these thumbnails to see more of it. And we can even show the color controls here. So if we come down and we show the color controls, we're back into our coloring page, but we can do this per clip.